Welcome to Calcast, your Create International podcast. God Network News, where we give you a new perspective
on events happening in our world today.
This is GNN.
This is God Network News, episode 214. Welcome, GNN fans, to another episode of God Network News, the podcast that tells you what God's doing around the world. Not what CNN tells you, but what GNN tells you is going on in the world. If you're tired of listening to all of that crisis network news and you want to hear what God's doing, well, give us a listen. Steve Addison is a great podcaster and very passionate about movements of peoples to Christ. And Steve has his own podcast, very successful podcast, with over 226 podcast episodes. And the name of his podcast is On the Road to No Place Left. And we highly recommend that you subscribe to his podcast because he has an overwhelming library of exciting topics related to movements. And if you want to learn more about movements, this is the place to find the information, and he has lots of training and tools and other resources that will really make your investigation of this topic successful. So we really want to thank Steve Addison and his partners there at movements.net/podcast. That's how you can find it, at movements.net/podcast, for all of the resources that he has given us for these next few podcasts. Thank you very much, Steve.
So my exposure to movements really began when I was discipled by missionaries who kind of reached out to me. I was just this young delinquent involved in gangs and group homes, and I heard the gospel, and that became my discipleship journey. And so we started a kind of a small church in San Diego. And it was really diverse, and that was my training grounds in a sense for cross-cultural work. And we started different small groups around the city, and we moved to Southeast Asia probably 14 years ago. My wife and I, and at that time I had maybe read a couple things on movements, but had never really seen or really practiced in a sense. But that's how it began. It began organically as I was discipled. I think just going back to the scriptures and just seeing, again, just the pattern of the kingdom growth and the parables, of course, the book of Acts. But for the first couple years, we kind of labored and we learned. We did different businesses. I mean, this country where we lived was a closed, socialist country. It's a Buddhist animist country. And so how do you enter into the fields? How do you share in a way that's reproducible, and how do you help people obey Jesus? All those things I was learning as we were entering, as we were doing it. And but yeah, those parables, Mark chapter 4, the book of Acts, it became alive. It became the true book. I mean, it's the living word, but it became so real. I felt like we were living in the book of Acts as we saw God's faithfulness through just being obedient. So the country we lived and worked for about 10 years or so, we lived in this one, just kind of small province in the central part of the Southeast Asian country. My wife and I, we had teams around us, small teams for the most part, and we labored amongst this people group called the So. There was about 120,000 So people in this particular province. And we chose that province because of the gap. So we looked at the entire country and we said, hey, these people are without access to the gospel. And that's how we made our decision. We didn't choose to live in the big city with all the expats and, the cheese and the bacon and the amenities, but we chose specifically to be amongst that area. Obviously, in those types of country, you can't just move in and live with the people. And so we had to think of creative businesses to do. And so for the first couple of years, this is probably from 2008 to 2012, we just learned, labored through business and built relationships. But it was 2012 that we began to enter into the fields. And for the period of about 4 or 5 years, we had 50 different teams from mostly the US prayer walking through all these 250 so villages. So lots of people through the network came, a couple people that have been on your podcast, different mutual friends. We've had people physically walk, pray on site with insight. And every church that we've seen, every place that has fruit, at one point in time, there were people physically prayer walking through these places. And the So people now have actual church planting leaders. They have a 4th generation church. They have disciples that are, 6 or 7, 8 generations deep. Again, this is a very small context. It's a very small geographical area. And so to see 4th generation amongst an unreached people who are now reaching out to other unengaged groups, that's a miracle. It was early on that I woke up in this village way off the beaten path. It was the last village right before the next country. And my friend Tong Sin, he's one of the first family of believers amongst this people group. So I said, Tong Sin, come to me to the river, right? So we walked to the river, and on the other side of the river was this another village. And I said, hey, Tong Sin, who lives there? And he said, the yellow leaf people, the yellow leaf slaves. So in that country, they have this term for ethnic minority groups, and they call them slaves. But I said, hey, do they have the gospel? And he said, no. And I said, well, who's going to tell them? And he said, well, it's going to have to be me.
You're listening to God Network News Podcast with your host, Cal Curtis. Look up our website at godnetworknews.com.
I said, that's right. In fact, last night I had a dream as I was sleeping in your village that you and your people were going to share with all these surrounding villages. I actually had that dream, and I need to share that with you. But it's also in the Bible. It's in Revelation. This is God's vision, God's dream. And so that was 2011. And so Tong Sin had been captured by the vision. We had made multiple trips. And I would say now there are probably a good 8 or 9 churches in that area. And this month, one of my key partners, his younger brother, is getting married to one of the soul girls in that village. And so not only is there churches, but now there's this relational connection. Now there's this family connection in this unreached village. But I think vision was a key part. And that was over and over again, just kind of drilling God's heart for every nation. Yeah, I think especially in a country that, where we lived, there's definitely persecution. There's definitely, obstacles from the inside and from the outside. I think every time we would go out on these prayer journeys and do these trainings, I think there was always something at home, whether my kids got sick or my wife was stressed out or there was a military coup taking over the government, But I would say the greatest struggle and obstacle was from the church itself. And so you had groups and believers being baptized and baptizing others. And oftentimes the legacy churches in the provinces would give you a hard time. And it was probably in 2018 that we got a invitation from a key leader. His name was Pastor C. Now, Pastor C has been a great supporter. So he's been an insider of the Legacy Church this whole time. But at the same time, he loved on us and he supported us, and he even helped organize lots of different trainings, So we had an insider in the Legacy Church, and he said, Jonny, can you and your team share what God is doing with Dr. K? And so Dr. K is the leader of this Legacy Church in the country. He's like the president, he's like the top dog. And we were like, why would he listen to us? We're young, we're doing our own thing, and say, no, you just need to share what God is doing. And so me, Steve S, and a team of others, practitioners shared what God was doing. We just shared stories. And Dr. K said, just give me a few days to kind of look over and think about it and pray about it. And we actually handed him Ying Kai and Steve Smith's book in the local language. And he read it like 3 times that week, called us back, and he said, can you do a training for all the leaders in the country? And that began just this relationship with the Legacy Church that we didn't expect, because in the past they were just hindering the work, but now they're saying, we want to be a part of it. And that year we brought people like Kumar. He is a great friend and fruitful practitioner from India, as you know, Steve, and different friends like Daniel S. So just kind of this network, of No Place Left and movements. This kind of was also a part of what God was doing. And since then, we've trained over 5,000 leaders throughout the entire country. And we're seeing an access of 1,000 new groups started every year throughout the entire country. And Dr. K and the Legacy Churches, at least from the top, are no longer a hindrance, but they're saying, we want to be a part of what God is doing. It's not Jonny's vision, but it's God's vision, right? To release people to baptize and to start reproducing groups everywhere. So that's where we are now, from one small people group now reaching every single people group in this country.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider donating to help us continue to bring exciting stories fresh from the field. Visit our website at godnetworknews.com and select the PayPal link on the right side of the page, or consider becoming a Patreon partner to receive access to more valuable materials exclusive to our members.